In this video, we are going to talk about Jasmy, some of its recent price action, the important support and resistance areas, and where we can expect the price of Jasmy to go in the next few days and weeks. So we'll start by looking at the weekly chart, and what you can see right here is that Jasmy has been consistently dropping since late 2024. Jasmy went from about 6 cents all the way down to $0.005. This is a drop of about 90% in just about a year and a half. So Jasmy has been performing very poorly, obviously, and right now it is at an area that it can get support from, as you can see right here. Back in 2024, as well as in some periods in 2023, we've seen Jasmy get significant rallies from these areas, especially from back in January of 2024. Jasmy was at a very similar level, and back then it got a rally of about 10x from there in just about a year. So this does seem like a pretty significant area of support. There is also another area of support a bit below that at around 0.003. This actually is the all-time low. We've seen Jasmy get rallies from there twice in the past, in December of 2022 as well as in 2023. So this seems to be the more significant support area actually than where Jasmy is at right now. But Jasmy is still trying to hold on to this area. We've seen Jasmy consolidate here for a few months now. The very significant drop by Jasmy has been slowing down. We've seen it just continuously dump, but then recently, with correlation with Bitcoin, of course, getting a very significant rally, Bitcoin has recently went from about 60k all the way up to over 80k. Right now it is at just over 70k. So with Bitcoin getting this rally, we've seen Jasmy as well as many other altcoins slowing down the dump. Some of them have actually gotten a rally. Jasmy is not really one of them. We are still seeing Jasmy consolidate at best, probably even continuing to drop. Jasmy is still very clearly in a downtrend despite the recent consolidation. So right now it is trying to hold on to this area of support at around 0.005. If it does close a weekly candle below it, this would be a very bearish signal, and it would likely lead to Jasmy going all the way down to the next area of support. This would be a drop of about 40% from where Jasmy is at right now. To the upside, if Jasmy does cross this recent high at around 0.008, then that could lead to it actually having a trend reversal, but this does not seem very likely at the moment. If it does happen and Jasmy can create a higher high and then start creating a structure of higher highs and higher lows, then that would be a much more positive signal. But as I said, at the moment it is not looking very likely, and Jasmy is still in a clear downtrend. All of these recent highs are still continuing to be lower highs. And also, as you know from previous videos, in general, my outlook is that most altcoins will most likely continue to underperform Bitcoin. Since we are still most likely in a bear market, despite the recent relief rally by Bitcoin, I still believe that we are in a bear market. And usually in bear markets, altcoins do absolutely horribly. Historically, for us to see an altcoin season and for the altcoin market as a whole to outperform Bitcoin, we first need to see Bitcoin at the very least getting into new all-time highs, and usually also Ethereum getting new all-time highs as well, which at the moment, as you know, this is very far away from being the situation. Bitcoin is only at about 73k at the moment and very far off its all-time high, as well as Ethereum. So I'm not very bullish on altcoins at the moment in general, and with Jasmy specifically, the long-term structure is not looking so great. So now let's go ahead and look at the 4-hour chart for a more short-term outlook. We can see here that on the 4-hour chart, Jasmy is also in a very clear downtrend. Since May 10th, we do have this support area that Jasmy has consolidated at a couple of weeks ago, back in April, more like a month ago. So it is very possible for Jasmy to actually get a bit of a rally from here. This is a pretty significant area of support actually. What we would want to see is for Jasmy to first cross this area at 0.057 to create a new higher high, and really to confirm it, I would want to see it cross this high as well at 0.059. So if that does happen, then we could expect Jasmy to head back up to the recent high. As you can see here, we have this area of consolidation. So really the more significant resistance area is this one that we've seen Jasmy get rejected off of many times in the last couple of months. This is at about 0.0062. So we have like a 3-level structure of when we would expect Jasmy to rally. First, we needed to see across this area, this recent high. This would be the first very early first sign. Then this high would confirm it a bit more, and then finally, if it crosses the area of 0.062, which is this more significant resistance area, then we can probably expect Jasmy to rally all the way up to this recent high at about 0.0075. This would be a rally of about 40% for Jasmy. So that definitely does seem possible in the short term on the 4-hour chart. As I said, in the longer term on the weekly chart, I'm not very bullish about Jasmy as well as about altcoins in general, but on the 4-hour chart there definitely is some potential for it to continue to rally. But again, if it does continue to drop below this area at 0.051, then this would likely lead to Jasmy continuing to drop much further, all the way down potentially to the 0.003 area, as I showed you on the weekly chart. And now let's go ahead and look at the Jasmy chart against Bitcoin. What you can see right here is again that Jasmy is in a very clear downtrend against Bitcoin. Here, compared to the Jasmy against the dollar chart, Jasmy is actually very close to its all-time high, to its all-time low right now, sorry. On the dollar chart, the all-time low was back around 2023, and here, as you can see, this was actually a higher low than where Jasmy is at right now. Jasmy is currently very close to its all-time low. We've seen it hit the all-time low back in the October liquidation event. This was a very significant liquidation event across the entire crypto market, and back then Jasmy, as well as many other altcoins, hit their all-time low. Very briefly, this was for just a few moments, and then it went all the way back up very quickly, but since then it continued to dump. Then we had another significant low in December of 2025, got a significant rally, but then it continued to drop, and it is still very clearly a downtrend. We also have this recent high, just like we've seen Jasmy do against the dollar. So again, on this chart as well, in the long term, on the weekly chart, I'm not very bullish. I think that it is still very clearly in a downtrend. I am not very optimistic about altcoins, especially not against Bitcoin, since we are in a bear market. And I think that in the long term, Jasmy against Bitcoin will also continue dropping and probably go below this recent low at December of 2025 and head all the way down towards the all-time lows. Now, if we look at the chart of total 3 minus USDT against Bitcoin, which is basically the ratio of the entire altcoin market, excluding Ethereum against Bitcoin. So this chart shows how altcoins are performing compared to Bitcoin. And as you can see right here, in the very long term, across multiple cycles now, the area of where we get an altcoin season from, where we see altcoins start significantly outperforming Bitcoin, is at around this area of 0.27 or so of the total 3 minus USDT against Bitcoin chart. We've seen it happen in 2017 and in 2021 as well. We have not gotten an altcoin season before this chart hit those areas, and right now it is at around 0.37, so it's still quite a bit higher than this area of support. So this, combined with us still being in a bear market and Bitcoin being very far off its all-time high, make it very unlikely for us to see an altcoin season anytime soon, and I'm quite bearish on most altcoins in general. I would mostly stick to Bitcoin still at the moment, and if I do think of making any rotations toward Ethereum or maybe some altcoins, I will of course keep updating you guys, so make sure to subscribe to not miss any future updates about that. I think that most likely we will only see this chart bottoming and us having any chance of getting altcoin season in 2027 at the earliest. I think that 2026 is most likely going to be a bear market year for the most part, and we're probably not going to see altcoins as a whole performing very well. And as I showed you before, I don't think that Jasmy is really going to be an exception. Of course, there can be some exceptions and anything could happen, but I don't see a reason on the chart of Jasmy for why it would be one of those exceptions. So I am not very optimistic about Jasmy or all altcoins in general. If we look on CoinMarketCap at the page of Jasmy, we can see that according to the community, to 300,000 votes, 86% of the community is bullish. As I showed you before on the 4-hour chart, on the short-term time frame, I could actually see this and probably agree with this. Of course, it's not guaranteed whatsoever, but I do think that it is possible for Jasmy to get a pretty significant rally in the short term. But if we are talking about the long term, then I definitely disagree, and I think that Jasmy is most likely going to continue dumping a lot further, and I am not very optimistic about it, as I showed you before. And if we look at the general crypto fear and greed index, it is currently at 31, which is moderate fear, which makes sense. Obviously, we've seen Bitcoin get a pretty significant rally in the last few months, but then it started dropping again from the low 80s to the low 70Ks now. And again, in the short term, I think that it is possible for Bitcoin to get a pretty significant rally back up to over 80K. But in the long term, since I think that we are still in a bear market, most likely, I think that we will continue to see Bitcoin dropping further, which again will lead to altcoins dropping even more. And if we look at the altcoin season index, it is currently at 33, which again shows that we are slightly in Bitcoin season and that Bitcoin is outperforming most altcoins, which makes sense. As I said, we are in a bear market after all, and most altcoins do not do very well. So yeah, guys, that's the update about Jasmy. As I said, not financial advice whatsoever, but I would personally avoid being into Jasmy, at least in the long term right now. In the shorter term, there is some potential if it crosses this area of 0.0062. So if that does happen, there can be a short-term rally, but in the long term, I would avoid Jasmy. Not financial advice. That's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it and you want more updates about the Jasmy as well as other altcoins, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.